If you expand detail, you'll find a bunch of sliders that each pertain to specific physical properties that determine a fabric's drape. If you expand some of them, you'll see the units they're measured in. The first set of properties is stretch, which represents how stretchy the material is. The lower the value, the more elasticity that material has, and the higher the value, the more rigid it is. Shear is simply the stretch value of the fabric's bias. Increasing the value to match the weft and the warp will mimic materials that crease easily, like cotton, or decreasing it will express more elastic materials, like silks and jerseys. Bending controls the fabric's stiffness, or its resistance to drape. The higher the value, the stiffer it becomes, such as denim or other leather materials, and the lower the value, the more it will drape, like silk. Buckling expresses the shape of the fabric's crease. If the buckling ratio is high and the stiffness is low, you'll see sharper folds. For example, a leather material would be a 0 ratio. Internal damping reduces the bounciness of fabric. This setting is more relevant when working in animation mode, and helps control how the garment simulates while in motion. Density is the fabric's weight in grams per square millimeters. Increasing the value will increase its weight. And the friction coefficient pertains to the friction between fabrics. So by higher the value, the more friction is applied. This is helpful while you're layering garments. For example, if you tuck in a shirt into pants, either garment may slowly slide away from each other while simulating. Raising the friction value will help better retain the positioning of your styled garments. Lastly is the fabric's thickness, which is the visual thickness of the fabric. Now that we've covered how to apply plane surface textures, let's now explore some ways to apply your own prints. I have some examples in the materials folder. I've created two. One that's an example of a good texture repeat, and the other not so much. Since my print is conveniently linked in my library, I could just click and drag it over this icon within the texture section of my fabric. You can see that my fabric is a bit dim, and that's because I have a color applied still. I'll change it back to white so it's neutral and doesn't affect the texture's color. You can also apply a print by navigating to the browsing window and find its location from there. And lastly, you could also just drag and drop it right on top of the garment. A texture map window will appear that asks you whether you want to apply it as a texture, normal, or roughness map. I'll leave it as a texture. So using this bad texture example, I'll zoom in a bit more so you could see the tiled repeat. The texture's edges are clearly visible, and it isn't a best practice when trying to make your fabrics believable. Make sure while you're creating your all-over prints that you make a seamless repeat to get rid of those harsh lines. I'll apply my example of an ideal seamless texture. And now those lines are no longer visible. When you apply a print as a texture, I recommend you always apply a normal map as well. The normal map will retain the effect that the print is on a textured surface. It's a little hard to see. Let me max out its intensity so it's a bit more noticeable. That's better, and now it looks like it's actually on my cotton Oxford fabric. So for example, if I remove the normal map by clicking this icon, my fabric now comes off as flat and synthetic, and isn't very convincing as a realistic material. CLO offers a normal map library by either clicking on the 4 squares here, which will direct you to them. This is a collection of normal maps from all the fabrics offered in the fabric library. I'll choose the same cotton Oxford I've been using and click Open to apply. You can also find the normal maps within the fabric folder in the library. There's a folder up top that directs you to the same collection. Once you apply prints, there's a couple of ways to edit them. There's the Edit Texture tool up here that lives in both the 3D and the 2D window. If I select that tool, I could click and drag on the fabric to change the placement of the print. And again, this works in both windows. There's a gizmo on the top right that also allows me to scale the print. Click and drag it to scale up or down. This arrow on the edge rotates it. While you're rotating, you can hold Shift to get 45-degree locks if you want to be a bit more precise. And these two vertical and horizontal lines will stretch and warp the print. If you want to retain the print's aspect ratio, refrain from using those. If you're scaling prints within the 2D window, while you're scaling, you can right-click to get a transformation window that gives you the option to either scale by percentage or by dimension. I mentioned earlier I'd revisit the transformation section in the property editor when addressing prints. So if I navigate back to it and expand texture, I'll be able to view my newly scaled print dimensions, or also change them from here. Also, you can expand either the width or the height to find the percentage it's scaled. So if I wanted to see that at 150%, I could do that all from here. The Edit Texture tool also works in tandem with Print Layout Mode. You could find Print Layout Mode by expanding the arrow up here and selecting it. That'll take you to a new window that displays the patterns along a roll of fabric, and get the initial yield of it. Right-click anywhere in this window to find the option to Reset Default Arrangement. CLO will try to optimize the placement, and you can see the fabric's consumption over here. You have the option to specify the fabric roll width by selecting the fabric in the object browser, and within its property editor you'll see a roll section. You can either use the presets or customize your own. Now that I've adjusted the width, I'll reselect Reset to Default Arrangement to get a better yield. You can also move the pattern pieces yourself and arrange them accordingly, and wherever you place it here will also reflect in the 3D window. Also, notice how the Edit Texture tool remains in the 3D toolbar here to make adjustments between both windows. All the fabrics you apply to your garments are organized in the tabs up here, which you could toggle between them and make separate placements. So now in this tab I can reset the default arrangement and try to place my sleeve patterns accordingly to get the best yield possible. And once you're finished, just navigate back to the default simulation mode. Also, something important to note, whenever you use the Edit Texture tool, CLO will automatically switch the fabric view to textured surface, which is why some of my patterns are dark. All the dark parts are actually showing the backside of the fabric. So to prevent any confusion, make sure you set it back to thick textured surface to properly reflect both the thickness and the color of your fabric. So that covers the materials tutorial. I ended up with an interesting style here, but anyways, I hope you all enjoyed watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.